What up, y'all? I'm Dr. CBS here with Dr. Jared Ball, and you are tuned into episode 17 of The Last Dope Intellectual. All right, Jared. So today I want to shoot the shit about how we're going to move forward with The Last Dope Intellectual. So, y'all, your girl needs a break. So what's going to happen is that after 20 episodes, I'm going to take off a couple months. And so the first 20 episodes will be season 1, and then season 2 will kick off early September. But we are not going to leave you hanging. We will have LDI presence even throughout that time. So the first thing we'll do is we'll have a little LDI. So they'll be called a little LDI, which will be like one segment. So maybe a history of the present or an interview or a shoot the shit or whatever. And so there'll be some of those in that time. And then there'll also be a between-episode or two. So maybe a full episode, 1 or 2, maybe, live, maybe pre-recorded, that will have new content. But by and large, we'll have from the archives. And so we'll be replaying on Fridays older episodes from the first 20 of season 1. So I won't be completely off the map, but I do need to take a break for the summer to finish this book, to just really be able to hunker down. So I wanted to give you that heads up. But we're on episode 17. So you got this one and 3 more coming, and then we'll move to the summer break. So, Jared, what are your thoughts and opinions about this? Because I kind of made this decision unilaterally. Well, I talked to you about it, but what do you think?
Well, obviously, it's your choice to make. As much as I want a weekly dose of LDI all the time, I am mindful. As I share with you, having been in some form or fashion involved with this kind of production for a long time, even in radio, people I don't always think are fully aware of how much effort and work you put in, and and people who do this kind of work put in, and on a weekly basis, it can be a lot. And taxing. So I think it is good to take seasonal breaks. I think obviously you need to focus on your book, which is your major project at the moment. And we don't want anybody to get burnt out or worn out as they do this great work. So as much as we'll all suffer a little bit, I think it's worth it in the long run. And we'll endeavor to put some packages together, some best ofs, maybe some blooper reels, who knows? We'll and of course, we'll continue to be out here Kaepernicking and Ujima-ing it up, doing, so the work doesn't stop. We just, it's just going to take a little seasonal pause for the cause, rejuvenation. It's all good.
Replenish, Yeah. Yes, life fallow for a bit. So, but that's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing. So Jared and I will have to talk about which episodes we want to run. And so that might, run into a top 5, dead or alive, to think about, all right, what are the top 5 episodes we must play? I would love to hear from y'all. Like, I would love to hear from our LDI faithfuls, our LDIers, to see, which episodes do you want to see play again. Of course, you can access them anytime on Black Power Media. But, so that's it. So that's what we're going to be doing moving forward. But there was something else I wanted to shoot this shit with you about, Jared. And this is for those of us who are Black, radical or progressive, who have a platform. What types of conversations ought we to be having? And so I wanted to look at this clip from Mark Lamont Hill's show, where he's having a conversation with a white about a particular subject. So let's watch it, and then we could talk more.
I would hope that we could both judge each other as individuals and come to common values on that basis.
Fair enough. I would argue, though, that the ability to say, I don't see race, I don't recognize or own whiteness, is an extraordinarily white thing to be able to do. It's an exercise of power and privilege. You can ignore the label of whiteness, and still be able to enjoy all the spoils of whiteness. If I say I'm not Black, I don't see race, I still can't get the cab. I still work harder for less money. I still don't live as long. I still get longer prison sentences. I still am more likely to be executed if I'm convicted of a crime. I'm still more likely to die of COVID. I'm still more likely to get suspended in school. I'm still less likely to get pain medication in a hospital. The idea of saying that I don't see my whiteness, I don't recognize whiteness, is something we can say, but to me, that is just as fantastic. It is just as unimaginably unrealistic in real life as the very things you're criticizing. So to that extent, it's why we need critical race theory. We need to expose whiteness. We need to talk about race, and we need to talk about a racial construct. And your uneasiness or unwillingness, which I respect fully, and I mean that sincerely, to not own whiteness or to not even take on whiteness as part of your identity is something that you can do, because you can say, you know what, I'm Italian. You know what, I have a family history. But as a Black person who's had those things taken, as a Black person who was kidnapped from Africa, or my ancestors were, I don't have that luxury. I'm born into a tradition where all those things were taken away and melded together. Critical race theory is trying to expose that and talk about the intractability of it. The intractability of racism, the inability of this nation to come to terms with that is why we need critical race theory in schools. Anyway, I got to take a break. Christopher, I promise you can come back. I appreciate you. It was a great conversation. Thank you for joining me. And everybody, stay with us. Let us know what you think about this conversation. Much more coming up.
Well, we about to let you know, Mark. Just kidding. So content. Okay. So there's a number of things. Number one, to have a conversation about critical race theory, do you have to bring on some goofy who doesn't see race or doesn't believe in critical race theory? Like, is that who do we want to center on our platforms when we're having these types of conversations? Number two, critical race theory is not only a critique of whiteness. Critical race theory is also a critique of liberalism, including Black liberalism. And even the way that Mark Lamont Hill narrated Blackness as if it's just Black and it's just oppression and suffering, and that we need critical race theory to expose that. Number one, no, we actually don't. But I think critical race theory is one tool, but also like, this is why Black studies is important, because Blackness and Africanness is not just oppression. And also our history didn't start with slavery, Mark Lamont Hill. So we do have a past, we do have a rich history prior to that encounter. So, but I wonder if the very fact that he's having conversation with that white boy makes him frame it in that way, if that's the only way that he can shore up his argument in that conversation. And so I don't know. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
The first thing I thought of was you were just saying that is the late Dr. Russell Adams at Howard University, former chair of African American Studies, once told me in a disagreeable argument that when I made that point, you know, our history doesn't start with slavery. He said, brother, I'm a 1492 type to the present type of brother. That was he, in other words, even with that date erroneously selected with Columbus, his whole point was, I'm only concerned with our history as it starts in this hemisphere, which I just think is anti-historical. So, but anyway.
But in 1492, Black people, okay.
I know.
Maybe it was at 1588, maybe, anyway. Okay.
There was so many levels of illogic in his point that it just added to the comedy that he would pick 1492 to make his point. But the short of it is, philosophically, I have been opposed for 30 plus years to arguing with whites about of anything really. So I don't think any of these discussions are relevant to have with them publicly or privately. But the hustle, in terms of white supremacy and whiteness's actual, you know, it's the fact of it and its impact. I mean, this is if white folks or anyone else can't take that as a given, as a starting point for a conversation or anything else, then there's no point for me in having the discussion at all. So, but beyond that, but what really is going on here, this is a commercial media, false objective, false balance, professional journalism trope that people engage in all the time, where you bring in the straw person argument that allows for what we just saw for a very skillful Mark Lamont Hill to give a seemingly progressive, radical, thoughtful commentary using this white guy as the anti-hero. And the biggest problem I have, and I don't watch that platform enough, but the proof would be in the pudding. to what extent does Mark Lamont Hill have these conversations with Black folks and people of the tradition of radical Blackness that you and others and we here represent? So if you're going to have these conversations with that going in that direction, then maybe in that platform you could justify having it with him. But what usually happens is that straw argument is set up again to set the false edge of what is the acceptable leftwardness that Mark Lamont Hill can then project and symbolize. So the whole thing is just, as I think you and others would say, is just a no for me.
It's a no for me. And was it skillful? Maybe it was. I don't know, because I feel like, Mark Lamont Hill has a lot of good things to say. He takes a particular stand on Palestine. And I think he organizes for Mumia, I think, or but I don't even know what I'm saying here. I'm stumbling over my own words, but I just
meant skillful in terms of his delivery, not the content or the substance. That's all I would. That's all I meant.
Yeah. Okay. But I don't know. Maybe I should talk to him or something. But it's like I'm always ambivalent about Mark Lamont Hill, because I'll hear some things and I'm like, yeah, okay, that's progressive. That's left for the US, for what we can expect from, whatever. But then there's other shit. And I'm just kind of like, even like he debated Candace Owens. Like, it's like, to what end? I just wonder.
And that's exactly my point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the straw that he can allow in those spaces to be set up so that he can be presented as the acceptable progressive. But he won't have someone who is Candace Owens equivalent on the left, if there is such a thing. Like, he wouldn't have. Would he have you on? Would he have any of us in this BPM sphere of that we're created here on? That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. That's what I don't see happening in those spaces. So yeah, he does good work elsewhere, but in those spaces, he's going to be very limited.
That's interesting. Well, I just hope that on our platform, we continue to have like good faith conversations that center radical Blackness, and not only radical Blackness, but like Black liberation. And also, like, we produce content for people we want to talk to. Like, I don't give a fuck about whoever wants to hear whatever white boy's name was talk about why he doesn't see race. Like, okay, you're fucking backward and you have no sense of what is happening in the society. Who wants to hear about that? And who's sympathetic to that? And like, why are we even talking to those people? So anyway, so I just hope that our platform remains. But it's also how I felt about when y'all did that ADOS shit. Like, it's the same type of thing. It's like, who do we want to be talking to, and should we be using our energy and our, intellectual and political resources on people who like, are, they're not squad. Like, what's the point?
That's a legitimate critique. Again, my point would be, in our defense, would only be that we don't go from ADOS to the right. We go from ADOS to the far and continuing left. So in other words, that is as rightward as we really get, whereas others, ADOS would be as far left as they would go. And that's sort of what I'm trying to describe here. I get your criticism on that point, but just to make the comparisons, that's what I don't see happening in those other spaces. They don't ever skew to the left, even for the point of debate. They will set somebody up who's a conservative or a white, and sit there, and then they can set the thing up and be presented as an acceptable Black radical, and I think which makes the work we're doing here more difficult, because then we become seen as some illegitimate extreme, because if Mark Lamont Hill is as far left as we can go, then what the hell are we all about? So that's the problem. I'm
ultra leftist. I claim it. I don't care. So we out here on the left. All right. Well, I'm interested to see what will be popping off in the chat and in the comments. If Mark Lamont Hill is your boy, well, we on Black Power Media did respond to that interview. All right, y'all. I'm introducing a new segment called Pedagogy Parlay, where me, Doc Dab, and an occasional guest talk about teaching and pedagogy while Black and radical. And so today we are joined by my girl, friend of the platform, Dr. Layla Brown, to talk about all things Black and radical when it comes to teaching. So, Layla, thank you for being here.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
So what's on your shirt? Before we get started, what's your shirt game today? Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Period.
Yes, I felt like being in an earth tone mood today.
Yeah, you giving me Badu vibes. You giving me plant mother vibes. I appreciate that.
Don't forget the bronze goddess.
Oh yes, bronze goddess. See the highlighter hitting. Anyway, okay. First question, y'all. So we're all at different institutions. I'm at a small liberal arts college, and an elite liberal arts college. They call them the baby Ivies. Layla, well, up until for now, you have just completed your term at a public university, a research university, and then Jared, you are at a historically Black university, right? So I want to know, what is your colleagues' responses to your Black radicalism? Because as we know, even when there is a critical mass of Black people or any Black people at all, they're not always progressive and especially not radical. So in a general sense, like what have been your colleagues' responses?
So to be honest, for me, my classroom is mine. I don't really consult a whole lot of other people about what happens in my classroom. And I think I shared it on Twitter. I was really, 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 really happy with my students this semester with their final projects, because they were thinking creatively about ways. Like I had this one student who I told you did this no name mixtape where she read Nkrumah's Class Struggle in Africa alongside and like assigned tracks of No Name to the reading. And so like my classroom is mine. Like I don't really consult with other people, and maybe I'll get in trouble for this at some point, but I never submit my syllabi when they ask them. I mean, obviously if I go up for tenure one day, I'm gonna have to do it. But other than that, I really don't. But I will say that it kind of depends. Like where I am now is a mixed bag. I have some really good colleagues, and then I have some questionable ones. I'm just gonna put it out there. I'm gone now. I don't actually care anymore. And so I just, I make it a habit to only solicit advice from people whose opinions I value and whose politics I share. And the rest of them can kick rocks.
Period.
Oh man, no, I do submit all my syllabi, but at the same time, it don't really matter what's on the page because I'm very much the same way in the sense that once I get in the classroom, it's mine, and we do what I want to do, and I think we have a really good time. So the response I usually get is from faculty hearing from students that we have in common, how the student always loves what happens in my class. And I hear how, oh, Dr. Ball, I hear your influence is in my classroom again because your students keep bringing questions and this, that, and the third. And sometimes it's hateful, and there's jealousy, because as we talked about last time, overwhelmingly students that I get respond well to the radicalism. And when they see it not occurring in other people's classrooms, they bring the criticism. They're like, well, Dr. Ball said, how come you're not saying what Dr. Ball said? And Dr. Ball showed us this, that, and the third, but we don't hear that in this class. How come? So I hear that, and then I also have heard from a former president of the student union that he was told by the president of the university to stay away from Dr. Ball because he radicalizes the students too much. So there has been, I have suffered a backlash, this unspoken inertia of a backlash that is often attached to the phrase he radicalizes students. And I think a lot of it just has to do with the jealousy that people feel when anyway, so
yeah,
that's usually what I do.
So let me just say my thing, and then we can circle back. So basically what I wanted to point out is that it's not just jealousy, it's also like feelings of inadequacy. Because I find, so for example, at Carleton, we have a very stringent review process, like in terms of third year review. And so you have a committee, and your committee comes in and sits in your classes 2 to 3 times, each member of your committee throughout like 3 terms. And so it's interesting. So sometimes people will try to intervene on content and be like, well, what did you mean by imperialism? Or try to say how you explained it wasn't clear, or try to say particular tactics or methods or teaching tools that you use might make the student feel like this or that. And I'm like, well, point out an instance of that. Well, I'm just saying, well, don't just say, because you first of all, you sat in on one class, you haven't sat on the whole term. And secondly, you're just projecting. And so I think that there's a way in which formulaic critiques or critiques of approach or structure can actually be veiled hostility to the content, right? And so there's a way that people turn to like procedure, process, university expectations, these sort of coded language that are ways to kind of like make it seem like you're not doing your job well, when really they just don't like the content, or they don't like the fact that they don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So, and then part of, to me, being at a liberal arts college in Minnesota, which has like the Minnesota Nice, is part of that. Like, nobody's ever going to confront me. So, that's just, but there's ways that they can sort of try to ding you or check you in their own way through this sort of proceduralism. And so it's a sort of, it's not necessarily overt hostility, but it's a way of showing you that how you run your classroom, or how the content you choose to teach is antithetical to what's done at a particular institution. So sorry, Layla. I just needed to get that out. What were you gonna say?
No, well, because it's also making me think about the types of institutions and what they imagine themselves to be, right? And so I'm thinking about Carleton, which imagines itself to be an elite teaching institution, right? And that most HBCUs, we primarily focus on the teaching classroom, right? Mm-hmm. But then it's crazy because, like, when I was on the job market and I was interviewing at some R1s, people were like, I don't really care what you do in the classroom. Like, so
that's facts.
So I mean, and they literally, like, you can teach whatever you want, you do whatever you want, just don't fuck it up. You know what I mean? Like, that's essentially, what's kind of happening there. And I was gonna say to Jared's point, how do I say this with grace and ease?
Just say it. We ain't graceful on our
no, because it's because of the topic, right?
Yeah.
So I'm an HBCU graduate, and I do not appreciate public bashing of HBCUs in general. Yeah. However, a lot of our institutions are problematically conservative. And so hearing Jared say that you said the provost or the president?
The president.
The president was like, don't take those classes. There is this kind of paternalistic way that we engage our students at our institutions. And it's a double-edged sword, right? Because part of it had to do with understanding historically what the things would be that we would come up against out in the world, right? And so when they would get to, HBCUs, like, there's a preparatory process. And I understand that, but I also feel like it goes too far in a lot of ways. And I think that where I am right now, which is a public institution that wants to be a research institution, but still primarily serves working class students of color, they don't really know what they want to do. Like, on the one hand, they want to try to micromanage classrooms, but then on the other hand, like, they want to push their research agendas. And, and I think, and it depends on where you are, right? Because for me, I experience the same thing that Jared does. Like, the students that come into my classroom, they know what they're signing up for. So they want
exactly.
Exactly. Even historically, the ones that I've thought were giving me a hard time, like, in the end, that was just their, I don't know, weird way of doing so, but there's still something that they wanted. And so it'll be interesting to see when I move to this new university and I'm actually in an anthropology department for the first time and not in a Black studies department, what that's going to look like for me.
I have no, and that's the other thing too. What I will say is that even when I'm at these white ass institutions, I have no experience outside of Black studies, maybe in ethnic studies, but like I'm just Black studies as fuck. Like there's just no outside of that. And so I don't have a lot of the hostilities that other people have, which is why I'm always interested about. And also, like to your point, my classes are primarily taken as electives, right? Because we have very few majors. And so even Introduction to Africana Studies is people from other fields who are just like, oh, whatever. And many of them come in thinking it's going to be that easy class. And then they're like, at so much reading. Well, we read in this hoe, period. Next question. So, but all of that to say, like, I'm always interested to think like, you know, what colleagues think, not necessarily even about your performance, but it really is about the content, because in the final analysis, students have a lot to say at Carleton, but in the final analysis, it's your colleagues who are voting on tenure and promotion, you know? And so, and they'd be like you're saying, they'd be conservative or liberal at best, very few radicals, you know? So,
that's right.
So next question is, what is your favorite Black ass class to teach?
Well, you know, my area is Afro Latin America. So, and actually, you know, a lot of people, well, I guess it depends on the type of institution that you're at. But I hear a lot of people say that they don't like teaching intro classes, but I actually really enjoy intro classes. And maybe it's because, you know, we often are struggling with majors in Black studies or Africana studies. And like, I feel like the intro classes are the places where like, I grab people, like people who say things to me like, you know, I really love this class, but you know, I need to get a job, right? And so I need to major in something else. And so usually, like, I don't know, I just feel very successful at converting people, not fully, but like I usually get double majors, whatever. And I always tell them like, it's really actually even more important, I think, for you who thinks of yourself as an engineer or a nurse or whatever, to have a more rounded perspective, because all of these kinds of biases impact what you think. It's somehow empirical, it's somehow objective. And so if you coming into my classroom allows you to question what you think is objective, then that's one of the biggest takeaways for me. And so teaching the Afro Latin America class, I've actually particularly loved it here in Boston, because I've had so many students who identify as Afro-Latino and have never had a class that helped them think about their identity as Afro-Latinos. And like think about them in personal ways, but also in politicized, historicized ways. So that's one of my favorites to teach. I don't know, I really like the kind of introductory conversations and questions that students have. And I also like, it helps me with my own teaching, because every time I hear new, like the questions that they're having, it gives me a sense of like what the lay of the land is outside of the classroom. Because I think as academics, sometimes we can kind of live in bubbles. Like, you know, we think that certain things are norms that are not norms out in the world. And I think that we get reminded of that by our students.
Yeah, see, I haven't had, for most of my experience, you know, we just started an African-American, African Diaspora Studies program this past semester at Morgan. So I haven't had any, for most of my career there, going on, I think 17 years now, there's been no Black labeled official courses. You know, we don't do much of that. That I was able to teach for sure. But so I would get into Layla's point, I had to sort of refashion an appreciation for like Introduction to Media Studies, which I taught for about 14 years. Every semester, 2 sections of 30 plus students every semester for 14 years. So I had to refashion that into something, and I turned that into the Blackest, radicalist, and as an introduction to media studies, where you have to go through, you are forced to be interdisciplinary. You're forced to cover things like the history of the establishment of the United States, the early forms communication technology and method took, and for what purposes. You're forced to go through all of that. And then if you just take it from the African world perspectives, it becomes this beautiful you know, so I would just start teaching it from the perspective. So what does an intro to media studies course look like from the perspectives of those who were colonized, enslaved, oppressed? From there, how did they establish responses to these structures, and go from there? And then you add a little political economy. I mean, I used to, by the time before I left that school, I loved what I was doing with those classes. And it became, and that was the class, as we talked about before, where one of the students was asking, is this going to be all Black Panther-y? Is this going to be your approach? And I'm like, hell yeah. And they loved it. So, and I would even draw on the board. When we had a board, you know, or even a chalkboard when I first started, I would like draw a little thing and say, here's what you're used to. Here's the conservatives. Here's the liberals. And then I would draw a line that never ended. And I would say, I'm all the way over there somewhere. So this is where the class is coming from, like off the board. I'm not even registering. I'm so politically off these charts. and you know, and it would be great. So and I'm going to be, find ways to do the same thing in whatever courses I end up teaching. And it's beautiful doing it that way.
You know, I think intro is actually the hardest course to teach. As somebody like classically trained in Black studies, teaching a Black studies course is very difficult because introduction to Black studies is not introduction to Black history. It's not introduction to African American literature. It is introduction to Africana studies. And so I find it exceptionally difficult to teach because I feel like I have to go through the history of Black study, which is Black study prior to the formal institutionalization. And then I have to teach the struggle for Black studies because Black studies is objectively political. Then I have to teach the epistemological and political debates once the field is established. Plus people need to know about Black people. So again, most of these folks come in knowing nothing about Black people. And then Africana is not just African American. And so even though I would say my focus is largely African American, then trying to draw in the Caribbean and Latin America and the continent and Europe, it's just a notoriously difficult. And so I always suggested that it's taught in 2 sections because you need to have like the epistemology and politics, and then you need to have like the development of Black people. You know what I mean? Which is how it's taught, I think, probably at the graduate level. But so I don't like teaching intro. I think it's hard, and especially 9.5 weeks. It's sort of like I haven't gotten it down yet. I think I taught it maybe 2 or 3 times, and it looks radically different each time because I'm still trying to figure out what that actually looks like. So I like teaching my Black Radical Political Thought 1919 and 1969 course. I really like that course, but it's another one where people come in knowing nothing. I talked last week about how I do this, little informal survey, like people have heard of NAACP, Thurgood Marshall, Du Bois, but have never heard of like William Patterson, the International Labor Defense, or Powell v. Alabama, because these are Black radical histories and like what, and so it's interesting to teach not only about, Black stuff, which is assumed, but also like the Black radical, and also like then the differences between like socialism and communism. And I haven't actually talked about anarchism, but I need to incorporate that into my classes more because I've just gotten acquainted basically. But yeah, so that's my favorite course to teach. I feel like that's this course where students and I've gotten a lot of feedback that's the course where they've learned the most at Carleton, just because you come in from knowing nothing to knowing very much. And then, out of that course, we'll get some majors, or we'll get people who write their political science thesis on some Black shit or some, communism or whatever, join DSA. And so I think it's a pretty transformative course in that way, because oftentimes I'm people's first Black female teacher, and certainly their first Black communist teacher for sure. So anyway, I like teaching that class.
I just wanted to say very quickly, I know this foregrounds, I think, where you want us to go, but I did want to ask, do you ever use Karenga's Intro to Black Studies when you taught Intro to Black Studies? And if that has been updated? And I ask in part because I taught Intro to Black Studies for the first time this past semester in I think more than a decade. And I kept making the mistake. I had to keep catching myself. This is not a history of Black people. This is a history of Black studies. And I'm glad you made that point. But anyway, I was curious about where Karenga's, if that factors into your intro course.
So I talk chapters of IBS in the capstone course because we were comparing different texts, but I usually use Perry Hall in the Vineyard. I actually really like in the Vineyard. And then there's the People's College. So Abdullah Kalamat and them have a Africana Studies text. And so I combine them. And then I use Nagi L.T. Warren has this book. So I also structure my course on around Du Bois always. And so Nagi L.T. Warren has a book called W.B. Du Bois, Grandfather of Black Studies, where I think the way she sets up the book is a good way to set up a course. But I think IBS is an incredible text. I really do.
I think you did a great job. I just was not caught up. So I'm glad you just helped me out with some of that right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it's ever changing. What were you going to say, Layla?
I was just going to say, to your point about all of the things that an intro class has to do, because even as you're trying to create some kind of radical understanding, right? Then you also, like, a lot of students have never been exposed to any kind of Marxist, like any kind of sort of critical thinking. And so then you have to have all kinds of secondary and tertiary conversations, and they're not reading them. So, like, they're not reading secondary, reading material. They're not reading suggested readings. And like, well, they're not, But one of the things that I found really, like, I don't know, and maybe, I don't know. So it's interesting to think about teaching in different parts of the country. I'm from North Carolina, and I went to HBCU, and I don't know. I felt like there were certain things, even though I felt like there was a dearth of information in public schools about Black people, there was something. Like, I do remember even having Kwame Ture in my middle school textbook. I mean, it was like a page and a half, but yeah, I did. Yeah. I did. But it was like a page and a half. And then when I moved to Boston, and my classroom would be like predominantly like African diasporic students. Like, I would have, in any given semester, I would have students from 7 to 10 different African countries, Caribbean countries, whatever. And all of them are telling me I've never learned anything about Africa. So then I'm like, damn, like I don't like Henry Louis Gates, but then I start assigning shit like African origins documentaries and shit, just because I feel like if you come in my classroom and you tell me you've never learned anything about Africa and this is an intro to Black studies, because I gotta give you something. And so, like, I don't know. As a pedagogical practice, I have started like taking a lay of the land. Like, what do my students know? And like adjusting my syllabi each semester accordingly. So like I have a baseline for the syllabus, but I have a lot of room for flexibility to change things around based on like what I feel like students in my class have been exposed to. And like, I don't know. I was just shocked when my students told me that like nothing. And like, even to your point about like, I always, in all of my classes, every class I teach, I do map quizzes. I don't care. I do map quizzes in all of them. And I remember this one student saying to me, had an African map quiz, and I include the islands around the continent. And she was like, there's just so many. My response to her was, how many states are there in the United States? Do you know them all? Okay, all right, you'd be all right. And like, but it's just, a lot of students' approach is that it's a cumbersome thing to even have to think about, right? And so like, to me, intro is as much about the teaching the sort of trajectory of Black studies as it is about the project of Black studies, which is about questioning these normative logics, right? And so both from what they read and how we engage in the classroom, I think I do that because, a lot of my students are not accustomed to actually being asked to process aloud. Like, they're very used to sitting and writing on the paper. And when I say to them, like, all of your questions cannot be directed to me as the professor. You need to direct questions to your classmates. Your classmates need to respond to your questions. Like, you need to pull out, basic shit. Like, I remember we were reading Freedom Dreams, and like I just did a basic reading quiz, and I asked them something about the chapter on China, and it was a basic question. I even told them to pull out the books, and I remember having to tell them like, y'all, there's a thing in the back of the book called an index, there's the question that I asked you on the quiz. There's a word in the question that you can go to the index and find, and the index will tell you what pages to go back to in the text, even if you didn't read it. And so like, I feel like we're doing all of these things, right? We're teaching them how to read. We're teaching them how to skim. You know, all these things. So it's just, I'm just thinking about all the things that we're tasked with in those classroom settings.
Yeah. Well, that's me in footnotes. It's like, you know, them little numbers. And then that little word either at the bottom of the page or at the end of the chapter, at the end of the book, read the footnotes. Like, there's more information there. When you're asking me for sources, look at the bibliography in the book I assigned. Like, you know, and so this gets to my next question, which is, what are some of your favorite, or what are like the activities and teaching tools that you use? And so I'll just start with, I always have the reference librarian and somebody from the Learning and Teaching Center, the Writing Center, come in and do a presentation. And it's usually around annotated bibliographies, because I always have an assignment of annotated bibliographies. I think it's a really important assignment. And so I always have them come in and do a presentation. Reference librarian and somebody from the Writing Center, Kathy and Claudia. And they usually come in and do it together, because it's like, number one, the Writing Center is there for your enrichment. And it's not just a punishment, because often when we send students there is because they did badly on an assignment. But it's like, this is staff. They work for you because you're paying their salary. Like, utilize those resources. You know, if you don't know what a thesis is, go ask. Like, go utilize all of your resources. You're paying an astronomical sum to be here. Why not? And then the reference librarian, because it's like, they need to know the difference. How do you find periodicals? Like, how do you find journal articles? How do you find books? What is a reference text? And so I think incorporating other important staff into the classroom is important. And also because it's like, an institution is not just made up of faculty and students. There's also staff, and like, these people matter, and it's important for them to come in. You know, it's important for us to understand them as part of this institution, but also like, they have a lot of knowledge that I don't even have, because like, I don't necessarily want to teach writing. I'm not a writing teacher.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's something that's really important. And then to your other point, another thing that I do often about students not reading secondary and tertiary texts is that I actually bring like archival documents or short articles, and we do like round robin reading. So depending on the size of my class, I usually have smaller classes, or if it's a larger class, I'll break them up into groups, but they literally sit in a circle and take turns reading a text. And then when we're doing it as a class, I'll stop and ask questions along the way. But number one is so they can process information out loud. Number two, so they can understand that learning is a collaborative enterprise. And number three, because oftentimes reading out loud, again, there's a stigma or a form of punishment associated with it. And so, but I do ask students, if you don't feel comfortable reading out loud, you don't have to. I've never had anybody opt out. But it's also so that they can get comfortable reading out loud. And it's okay if you stumble over words. Y'all know my non-reading ass. I be fucking up all the time on here, but it's like, whatever. So what? You know what I mean? And so round robin reading allows. So it's like, if nobody read anything else, we at least have a centering document around that we will discuss around. So that's something that I like to do in class a lot. And I think that students are very receptive to it as well. So what about y'all? What are some of the tools that you use?
I actually love that. I started doing it. I started doing it more. Again, there's so much at these different types of institutions, because I did my PhD at Duke, and the students at Duke, I don't know, it's not a bad thing, but they at least knew that they needed to show up appearing to have engaged the text, right? I'm not saying that they did in any critical way, but they knew that they couldn't just show up with like, nah, I didn't read. In my current institution, like, students will just be like, no, I didn't read. And so,
next question, you like, what?
And so I really did. With some of the heavier theoretical materials, I started doing the reading aloud, because I was like, well, shit, if you ain't gonna read at home and then I'm just gonna be mad for this hour and 15 minutes, the least we can do is read aloud together, and you could get something, right? So I really do like the exercise. In addition to your point about the reference librarian, so one of the things when I was a postdoc at Bucknell that I really liked, they had this, like, they're really trying to push for like digital learning and stuff. And so one of the reference librarians came in and taught my students how to use GIS. which I really liked because I ended up making their final project, what did I call it? An essay map. So rather than having them write like a 10-page or 15-page research paper, I wanted them to map sites of rebellion in the Afro-Latin American world across time. So I wanted them to do it like in this period of enslavement, the period of independence, and the present. And so what they did was like find these sites on the map and, you know, create pins and imagery and whatever, and write essay entries, which altogether could have become a research paper or whatever. But I think it felt like it was broken down for them. And it was something that, like, I think it felt more engaging, and it was fun. Like, it was fun for them to present. It was something to have later on. So I really like that as a tool. And I think the last thing, well, there's plenty of things, but I just like to reinforce the idea that learning doesn't only take place in the classroom. And so I try to always have guest speakers who don't have academic credentials come into the class to talk about some of their experiences. So like actually, and what inspired that particular, the student that was reading Nkrumah with No Name, I had a friend of mine, Kambale Muzavule, come in and talk about what's happening in the Congo, and he works with Friends of the Congo, and I had him come in, and the students were, first of all, he's a really good storyteller. So like if you've ever met him, you've ever gotten to hear him talk, like he's just really, really engaging. And the students, these students stayed for an additional 45 minutes after class ended because they wanted to keep asking him questions. And they referenced him speaking in my class the entire rest of the semester. So like I do often try to just remind them that like the only, like, people with PhDs are not the only people that know things. So like, you know, I like to I think that's really important in the field of Black studies, because so much of the process of institutionalizing Black studies was about all of these people who weren't working in these institutions helping to build what the field was. And so I think we have to continue to put value in that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I had Kambali come to my class last fall, and the same reaction. The students loved it. They wanted to stay longer, and it was so dope that I took the audio, took out the students' comments, and posted it on imixwhatilike.org because Kambali was killing it. I mean, he was just so dope. So I like to do a lot of that too, bring people in, and I think I'm pretty fortunate to have interacted or come across a lot of really interesting people, and to work with a few who you know, we can bring in virtually or live and direct. But I will say my favorite activity I get from my man, Dr. Mark Bolden, and I would only do this in conjunction with him because it's a counseling psychology activity that I think you need someone with that kind of background to be involved with. And it only works in the kind of classes that I end up having, which are exclusively Black or African diaspora and don't ever include anybody, almost ever, no whites. Because in this activity, it's the color circle activity. And I know he knows the history, and he didn't develop it. It has a clinical history that he describes. But over the years, we've done it a number of times in my classes, and it's an amazing thing to see happen. You just tell people without any explanation, you just say, arrange yourselves in a circle from lightest to darkest. And then you just stand back. And with his counseling, there's a lot you see. I mean, it is deep. I mean, people, you know, and yeah, there's a lot of humor, but the reason I like to do it in conjunction with him is because, unfortunately, sometimes a lot of trauma is elicited. A lot of memories, a lot of bad experiences. And in one case I remember in particular, this sister, I mean, she broke down. I mean, she was in full collapse at because what you end up doing is you say, and one little thing that he showed me always happens. He said, watch this. The so-called brown skin or in the middle, they do all the positioning. Oh no, you're darker, you go over there. You're lighter, you go over there. And it's deep to see. And then, but of course, the culmination of the experience is that, and of course, I insert myself, so I'm always the lightest in the room. The lightest ends up standing next to the darkest person, and that becomes symbolically the point of the diaspora. That you end up, so you end up seeing like whatever ends up happening. It is. I don't know. It's a really powerful thing. And so when we do it, particularly at the beginning of a semester, it has made my job so much easier when you get into some of the details of diaspora or colonial influence or colorism, because people can reflect back on that. And no one can ever say, no, I'm above that, or that doesn't affect me, or what, because it's like from live and direct. Anyway, I mean, and and it has been some really fascinating and funny dozens jokes that have come that I've been introduced to as a result of the experience. So I mean, it's anyway. So that's been one of my favorites, if not my favorite, over the years to do as an activity.
It would be interesting to pair that to have them first like line themselves up from like shortest to tallest, and then by color, because shortest to tallest is relatively, there's not a lot of trauma associated with that. And also we've been lined up from shortest to tallest since kindergarten. Right. But comparatively it's more quote unquote objective, right? There might be a little bit of scuffling at the end, whatever, like, somebody's, but then it's like, all right, now arrange yourself by color. Like, so it's just to give them a sort of the difference, right? Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
But I think most of the scuffling happens in the middle. I think most of the disagreements, even with height, it has to do with people who find themselves somewhere in the middle. Because I think people who know they're objectively short or know that they're objectively tall, they're like, let me go ahead and stand over here. Let me go ahead and stand over there. And that's usually how it is. And it's always the people in the middle. And I mean, I just started laughing because I was even thinking about our after hours conversation yesterday when we were joking about colors, and we make jokes about it all the time.
All the time.
But I only make jokes about it with people who I know are comfortable with it, because for a lot of people, it is traumatic. It is very traumatic, and I, don't want to be.
Oh yeah, you got to be careful. I mean, there's a New Year's Eve I call it the New Year's Eve racial massacre in my memory, because I'm misidentified all the time. So I've kind of developed a kind of social response to it, and I just made a joke about this sister that I didn't know was a sister, to be honest, and because I thought I was on the she made me look I mean she was, but a lot of her issues came up and it ruined the whole evening, and I didn't mean for it to happen that way at all. So sometimes it was unfortunate, and I was to blame. So you got to be careful where you tell the jokes. You
generally are.
As I generally am, yes.
Yes. Well, what's interesting to me, it's funny how we've delved into the color. There's just so much to say, is that what I found is that I'm one of the middles, right? I'm one of the browns who would have been doing the arranging. But what I find is that
you would have been doing the arranging.
Hell yeah, right.
Period. But whether or not I'm light or dark often has to do with whether or not other people want to be light or dark. So whether or not, when people call me light-skinned, I feel like they have a stake at where they fit along the color spectrum. So they're very invested in the fact that I embrace light skin, which I do not. And those are the people that will roast you for using dark skin emojis or whatever. Like, so that is just very interesting that I find that is often my experience. So I'm just like, whatever. So, but that's
the important thing about it, though, because when I have the conversation about colorism, so for me as a person who teaches about race in Latin America as opposed to race in the US, it's really important for the conversation about these always being relational categories. Right. And so like that, and that's, to me, that's the most important thing in having the conversation about colorism, is that the categories themselves have no meaning. They only have the meaning that we assign to them, and they only become meaningful in relationship to other people. And that's the same with white and black. I mean, there is the exact same thing. And so, when we have those conversations about what it means to be like even for me, because I grew up in a family of very, very light-skinned people, in my conception of myself, I never thought I was dark-skinned, but in my conception of myself, I was like, I'm like a deep brown. And then, like, when I would talk to my dark skin, like objectively dark skin friends, they'd be like, "You're light skinned." I'm like, "In what world?" And so these are always relative or relational categories, and that's where the meaning comes from. And I think that's the takeaway lesson from those, for me in the classroom, from those lessons.
Right.
All right. So another question that I have is like, are your teaching methods translatable outside of the college or university classroom setting? So could you do the things that you do in your classroom in a night school, in, some type of like a MOOC or something that's like open online course, K through 12? Like, what do you think?
My answer's short. I think absolutely, because my issue is only about time. I struggle in short amounts of time, so I'm not the one you call for the rally speech because I struggle with that quick, But if you need a laid out, protracted lecture or a series, I'm good with that. I feel really good with that. So I feel like I could take any group of people and assess where they are on that first day, and if I have 15 weeks. I can pretty much bring anybody where I think we need to get. Just don't put me on that speech stage, that rally speech, and I'm good.
I would say yes too, and I think, but for a different reason. I think for me, I realize this. I am a teacher. It's the only thing I've ever done. It's the only thing I've ever done. Like, even as a teenager, I taught swim lessons. I coached swim team. I tutored after school. Like, every job that I've ever had has been teaching in some capacity. My grandmother was a high school teacher. My mother was an adult educator. And so I think there's just something about being in that position that's just comfortable for me. And so if somebody asked me, like, I have a syllabus because we have to have syllabi, but if somebody had asked me to do a lesson plan, I would lose because I cannot, because so much of the way that I teach is pulled from the room that I'm in. And so I have a grand objective for the day, but how we get there looks completely different depending on the makeup of the room. And I'm very accustomed to responding to that. I look at people's faces when I teach. I look at who's reticent. I look at who's excited. I can tell, I can tell when they haven't read. I can tell when they don't have a clue. I can tell when they're feeling things. And so all of that, it comes into the way that I teach. And, even when I'm okay, we got to go back to the text. We need to read aloud, all those things. So I think for me, that's my baseline in teaching. If what I do in the classroom is not translatable outside of the classroom, then it's not doing what I wanted to do. For me personally, because I am less interested, I'm less invested, in the sort of institutional enterprise, and I'm more interested in the ideas circulating out in the world and people figuring out what to do with them.
That's interesting. I think up until probably this past year when I was on sabbatical and did not do any teaching, I would have said no. Because number one, I'm not very patient. I'm not good at I'm not good at breaking things down. And it's weird because I'm a professor, right? Let me finish. I would not have thought, I would say, so just to get to the punchline, being on podcasts and doing talks with high school students or with night school, I did a Black feminist night school type thing, I felt like I got better at it, or I was less pedantic or less sort of inscrutable than I thought I was. I mean, I would still get pushback from time to time, especially on Twitter. Motherfuckers be acting like I'm speaking gibberish. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? So anyway, but I would say, but I do know, I do struggle with breaking down complex things because I don't know why, right? And I remember my mom telling me one time, if you can't explain it to an 8-year-old or a 5-year-old, you're not explaining it well. And I'm like, well, I didn't get a PhD to explain shit to 8-year-olds. I'm not a K through 12 teacher. So but I think that to your point, Layla, if people can't, the point is so people can understand things and they can take up and absorb the knowledge and then perhaps go and have conversations elsewhere. And if that's not happening, then it's what is the point? But yeah, so I don't know. I think maybe now, yes, that I've had much more experience just sharing ideas with non-academics. I even feel like going back into the classroom, I will be better at explaining things with like anecdotes or stories or examples. But I still don't know. I don't know. I think I'm best in a college or university classroom just because I feel like that's the language. So when people are like, so for example, on Twitter, when people are like, academics come on Twitter to gatekeep and use these big words or whatever to sound smart. And I'm like, actually, that's how I read so often, like in the types of shit that I read, that's my first language. And so it's actually easier for me to use quote unquote big words or to use some type of jargon than it is to try to not use it in jargon. And also it's fucking Twitter. I'm gonna say what I want to say in whatever form.
But also to a point that you make regularly, CBS, that there is a particularity to language. So not that I would ever disagree with moms, but I've heard that line before, and I struggle with it because there is a certain language and a lexicon that needs to be developed to get to certain levels of understanding that don't translate easily to 5-year-olds. So not everything can be taught to a 5-year-old. That's why they're 5. So I mean, I think, so I struggle with that. Go ahead, Lee.
I have a different position on this, and I think, and I don't know. I think so. One is a politics, right? I think that it is a political choice to constantly be engaged in the process of trying to distill ideas. And so this is the thing about the whole 8-year-old thing, right? You're not teaching the particular idea to the 8-year-old. You are scaffolding for the 8-year-old so that they can get to that point, right? And so like for me, one of the things that I think really impacted that was being able to do a PhD at home, right? So I'm from Raleigh and I did my PhD in Durham. And so the entire time that I was going through my doctoral program, I was still participating in my regular way with all of my family members and people who were invested in what I was doing. And not just like, I know people know me. So not just like my dad, who's like, political activist. I'm talking about my entire family, my grandfather who didn't go to school past 8th grade, right? And wanting to participate and wanting to give my family the benefit of knowing that they supported me through this process, and so they deserve to know what I'm doing, really helped me think about what's the point, right? What are these things that I'm doing? And then, but it's funny because on the flip side, in the academic arena, people read my writing, right? And they always say, oh, it's so clear. It's so, it's, and I don't ever know if that is, some kind of
patronizing, like
whatever.
It definitely is.
But the thing is, I don't give a fuck because like for me, that none of this matters if it only exists in an intellectual bubble. If what we write, if what we say, if what we do is not something that somebody we are 1% of the population in this country.
PhD holders, that is.
Yes. And then as Black PhD holders, I don't even know what it is, right?
It doesn't register.
Yeah. So, if what we are doing is only legible to us, that is elitism at its finest. And that's just not what I want to engage in. And so like for me, and I guess also too, because my dad, even though he's not a teacher, he's a teacher. And so like this process of like taking my 5-year-old niece through a series of questions to get her to a particular point is something that I think about and translate into my classroom, and that I think about and translate elsewhere. And so that is also why, like, if to go back to one of your teaching tools, that's actually why I really do appreciate anecdotes from students, because for me, and like a lot of people can interpret anecdotes as like they didn't read, so they're just trying to make a contribution and But for me, I read it differently. I take anecdotes as a way of attempting to seriously engage the material in a way that they will take past this particular moment. And so if they can connect what they're reading, what we're talking about, to something, real in their lives, you just remember it better. And for me, that's how I learn. Like, I can read all day. If I don't have an opportunity to talk to you, Sharice, or talk to you, Jared, about what I've read, I don't process it the same way. I need to have a conversation about what I've read. And it just doesn't process for me the same way. And so like for me, I think it's just about my processing. And so like I teach the way I process.
Yeah, all good points. Well, I guess the last thing I'll say to when you were talking about scaffolding, I think it might have to do with the material that I teach, because I feel like there's so much scaffolding about Black radicalism and especially Black communism that I'm like, fuck that. I'm not doing all that shit. Like, that's literally how I feel, which is why I say I'm impatient and why it's difficult to explain things. You know what I mean? Especially in quote unquote accessible language without using particular types of jargon. And so it's like I always say, I lack revolutionary patience. And so it is, but I will say joining BAP and being on podcasts and doing things that are more outward facing has definitely given me a new appreciation and new ways to practice that. But I'm still academic. Fuck it. Probably a useless one, but that was dope.
You're not a useless one.
Okay. Final question, y'all. Final question. What is the best and the worst experience you've had with a student? And this also could be a good or a bad. It doesn't have to be the seminal one, but what immediately comes to mind? Best and worst. Layla, go.
I got both of them quick.
Go.
Well, my worst. It was an intro class. I had the students do final presentation that they had to pre-record. And I told them to just pick one of the weeks, like pick one of the subheadings, and do like a 10-minute presentation. These two white boys from like, I don't know, somewhere down east, out in eastern North Carolina, something. First of all, the project wasn't about nothing, so I didn't even know how to start. But the video starts with them in like bait and tackle uniforms. They got a poster of Barack Obama in the back with a bullseye on them, and they're like, it's crazy. And then they're sitting here talking about, like, they start talking about affirmative action. They start talking about why women don't belong in the military, and because it was that, what's her name, the Abigail girl from what was it, Texas, talking about not getting into UT Austin or whatever. It was around that time. And like, I just remember the 10-minute video stopping and all of the students in the classroom just shooting, like hands shooting up. And I just remember saying to them, I was like, you know what? I said, I'm not even going to do Q&A with you all because the egregious nature of this presentation. I said, on top of the fact that you didn't even cite a Fox News article. So you fail because you just didn't actually do any research. But then you also just came in with some bullshit. And so we're not even going to do Q&A. Just know you failed the class. That was the worst. Then the best one was also in the intro class. And this student, I'm actually currently on her doctoral committee. She's working on a PhD in nursing. But I remember asking for feedback at the end of the semester about the class. And she stood up and she said, I've always been an A student. She said, but this is the first class where I was ever asked what I thought about something. This is the first class that actually made me think critically about what I was reading, and I will, take this with me forever. And, here we are, I think, what would that be? We're like 6-7 years later, and she's in a doctoral program, working a PhD, trying to help Black women. So that is my proudest moment.
Yeah.
My best moments are sort of a collective. And Layla, you mentioned this before, that when students stay after class, to me, that's the highest honor, because they usually can't wait to get out of there. They can't. So just collectively, all the students that come to my office or stay after class or even want to stay on and chat after a virtual class, or they send these emails at the end of the semester, even after grades have been submitted. So there's no messery going on. And they're saying, I just want to say, I appreciate, even the students that don't do well, but have said, look, man, I know I didn't put in the work. You had to give me this grade, but you're still my favorite professor. I just want to that when people go online and they say, shout out to Dr. That stuff really makes my day. I mean, that's the most, so just collectively. The worst was some years ago, some technology in the school went missing. And my then chair wanted me to, long story short, wanted me to participate in aiding some detectives come to my class to find out who was there and if they in fact were guilty. And I told the chair, the detective showed up, I told them and the chair, my classroom is not a space for your work. We don't do that work in this classroom. So, agents of the state are not welcome in the classroom. And my chair tried to say, but they're stealing from other students. They're stealing technology from us, from your, and I was saying, nah, man, I don't necessarily see it that way. And even to the extent that that is true, I'm not going to aid the process of turning my classroom into an extension of the police state. So so they left. The chair, that part I was successful in, but it turns out that in trying to communicate this with the student without alerting the police which student it was, after they left, I try to pull the student out into the hallway. He misinterprets the whole interaction and comes out with his fists up like he's ready to go. Like he thought I was trying to turn him in. After all of that, I'm condensing a long story, but after all of that, I come back to try to be like, look, man, this is what's going on. If you have, and he comes out with his fists up. And my initial reaction was like, I was like, look, man, I started to, and I was like, wait a minute. And I just said, look here, man, and I tried to break it down to a man to man, I tried to do, and that part, I mean, it ended up successfully, but that one moment I was just so unprofessional, caught off guard because I saw his hands go up. And when a man squares up, I'm like, well, don't get it twisted, don't let the light skin and the button down fool you. Like, I would defend myself.
Skinny raisin eating Jared either. This
that's true.
Jared, this one raisin.
It was
Jared.
big, full overeating Jared, and I was like, no, man, we're not, And I'm thinking, I'm also like, I just also defended your punk ass, like don't like. Anyway, so it all ended up going more or less well. But in that one moment, I was like, this is the worst I've ever felt. Because I've never had a student actually put his fists up. Like he was like, but I think what was ended up happening was that he was not used to a situation where an adult man would say, let's go talk man to man without it being him and being invited to a fight. Yeah. So I tried to catch myself and I eventually did catch myself and we got it together. But, anyway.
That's hilarious. Okay. I had to think about this. Well, I think my worst experience was actually when I was a graduate student instructor. And long story short, like I essentially had this student who was in a particular sorority say that I had given her a bad grade because I was in an opposing sorority, and went and told the professor, and then the professor who went on to become my dissertation advisor went in and was saying like he did not think I transitioned well from undergraduate to graduate school because I went straight through. And secondly, like was questioning, just, got hella, if I was taking it seriously, got hella mad. And I want to say this is probably my second semester in graduate school or something. And so, and I just remember being like, this shit is this paper was trash. Like, I don't give a fuck about none of that, like sorority stuff. Now, granted, like because I crossed my sorority as a senior, I was still new in my sorority. I still, was still hype about it or whatever. But like, I could walk and chew gum at the same time. I could be in my sorority and I could also like be a professional. And so I just remember being so affronted by that. Number one, because of the professor's response. And number two, because it made me doubt myself. Like, oh my gosh, like, am I not doing this right? Like, was I too harsh? And and it made me, and I think that's part of my aversion to grading, other than the fact that grading is trash, like that experience, And so I just remember having to work very diligently the rest of that term to not be stank to that student and to treat them fairly, irrespective, because I am petty. And I thought that was petty. And so that's probably my worst experience with the student. Probably the best. I can't necessarily think of the best, but one that I really enjoyed. So I loved teaching my R1 class, which is it's A&I. It's what does A&I stand for? I forgot what it is, but basically all the freshmen, their first year, they come in and they take an A&I class. So it's 15 students. They all take one. It's like
advanced instruction.
It's something. It's like, I forget what it stands for, but it's basically like a scaffolding course. I was trying to figure out what it is. Yeah,
like my brain is like, I have completely shedded everything related to teaching for these 2 years because I'm not. So, but it's basically you get them acclimated to the institution, and it's a content course. And so students pick their different A&Is based on the content of the course. And mine was Black liberation in the 20th century. But anyway, it was this one activity where I asked students, it was about, I wanted them to think about their process of writing and their process of reading and all the things that it entails to be a good writer and a good reader. And so I asked them, like, how do you make ramen noodles? And they were like, you put the shit in the pot and you put the sauce on. I'm like, no. Okay, so let's start. So you take the pot out, you set it on the stove, you got to turn the stove on, you fill it with water. You put the noodles in a boiling pot, or do you put the water in first? Do you put the sauce in immediately, or do you wait till the noodles are done and you drain them? So anyway, I had them really break down what it takes to make ramen noodles. And at first they were like, what is she talking about? Like, why is we doing this? But then I told them, so the board was full of all these directions. And it was like, just as you like, it actually takes all these steps to do something basic like make ramen noodles. So too, do you want to think about what exactly do you need to do engaged reading and to do engaged writing? And so in this course, because we were doing things on metacognition, like I want you to think deeply about your process, because being a good writer is as much about knowing yourself and knowing what works for you as it is with these basic skills. So anyway,
look at you doing your Mrs. Miyagi with the wax on, wax off.
I'm gonna have to take it.
Yeah, no, it was. And it's interesting because then I had other professors emailing me that their students had told them about this activity.
That's the best.
And I was like, they be stealing shit at Carleton. So I was like, whatever, y'all can have it. I don't own it. It's in the intellectual commons now. But anyway, so I just liked how illuminating that was for them. And then they were like, I actually love teaching them first semester freshmen because they're so eager, especially at Carleton. They just went through, the cult thing is known as orientation. So they're Carls, they're energetic, they can't wait, they want to learn.
Carls.
They're Carls. That's what they call them. And I'm like, I'm not no fucking Carl. But anyway, so it was, I really enjoyed that class. So anyway, that's it.
So, but then so I mean, that's just me pushing back a little bit on what you were saying before. You got some teaching skills.
Well, yeah, I do. I gotta say that because look, y'all, I'm a researcher first. How you said you're a teacher first. I'm a researcher first. And so that's always how I've understood myself. But again, there's these little moments where I'm like, I actually know what I'm doing. So fuck y'all. I'll try to make it seem like I don't. But this was dope, y'all. I can't wait to have another conversation. There are many, many questions, themes, issues to discuss about pedagogy and teaching. So thanks for the dope discussion. All right, y'all. And we're also going to do another segment of the Doctor's In with Dr. Layla Brown. And so we about to hit these questions that y'all sent on Twitter, from drcbs.com, and I think one from Instagram. So let's get into it.
So let's start with this with Dr. CBS from drcbs.com, where we do encourage people to go and check out and send and submit their questions. Can you all talk about monogamy as it relates to capitalism, sex, domestic violence, and communism? So much of male and female strife, IMO, is because of infidelity, but is monogamy even natural or realistic? I have read a few articles that said monogamy was created to ensure estates would be passed down to their true heir, and that rings true, I'm assuming they meant, and taking a man's last name only, and that rings and taking a man's last name only seek to subjugate women. One of the articles said that monogamy normalizes jealousy, which I agree with. Hopefully you don't think my question is quote unquote raggedy, LOL.
So let me just say there was some other details that I did not include that were raggedy, but this is fine. And so I'll just start off by saying, I think that there is a link between property relations, marriage, patriarchy, and a particular type of monogamy, right? And monogamy and how specifically wealth and property are passed on through the male side of a given bourgeois patriarchal family, and then that family unit representing the basis of the nation state. And so I do think that there's something very, very political about that formation. And not only that formation, but the criminalization and the demeaning of formations that fall outside of that. And so this is why we have statistics like female-headed households or single-parent families, and the way that pathology accrues around that understanding. And by criminalization, like, so same-sex relationships, right? That this is still illegal in many countries throughout the world, and there's still sodomy laws, for example, on states, on the books in states here in the United States. And so in that regard, I think that it bears thinking about that sort of material function monogamy. Now, whether it's natural or inherently, if humans are inherently disposed to monogamy or to polyamory or whatever, I have less dog in that fight. But I do think the question is interesting from the perspective of property, wealth, and ownership, and how that is rooted in the intersections of like patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, quite frankly, because as we know, there are all different ways that racialized people, African people, have formed families, multi-generational households, kinship linkages, et cetera, that are other ways to form families that have been pathologized or that have been rendered deviant because they aren't the sort of bourgeois family structure. The other thing I'll say about it is that there's a bunch of reports coming out now that less and less people are having children, less and less people are getting married, and that might be a sort of contestation to this bourgeois family form that, you know, shit, we broke. We can't afford to have kids. We can't afford to ascribe to that 2 parents, 2.5 kids, a dog, and a picket fence or whatever. So what y'all think though?
So you're saying people are really, you know, moving to this I can be broke and bad by myself type of mentality?
Yeah, or be broke or rich and be out here loving and connecting the way that I please, you know?
Yeah, I don't know that it's, I mean, so I would be interested to see how the statistics bear out. Even though people are getting married less, does that mean that people are coupling or partnering less? And I don't know that that's true, right? Because
they're having less kids and they're marrying less. Those are like the two things. And that's what the state cares about, because the state cares about reproducing the population.
Yeah, exactly. And in this question, you know, the same about about monogamy, but for me, it's the institution of marriage that's more interesting in the question. And you know, it even makes me, you know, for further reading, Friedrich Engels' Origins of Private Property, the State, and the Family, you know, help people think about this. But I do think,
white.
But I do think that it's important for people to reconceptualize what it means to relate to one another. And I mean, even in time, a lot of people don't get divorced because they can't afford it. You know, it happens in both regards. And so the institution of marriage in and of itself, while the US tries to sell it to us as something that, you know, gives us tax breaks and whatever, you know, it creates other kinds of issues too. And I do think that it is, you know, they said, what they say? They said mama's baby, papa's maybe. Mm-hmm. One of the sort of logics about the kind of institution of marriage in the contractual legalized form is about a particular kind of patriarchal rule over women. It is about the fact that when women birth babies out of their vaginas or out of their stomachs, they know that it's theirs. And men, you know, you might be fortunate enough to have a stamp on your child where you can't deny him or her, but you might not. And so a lot of that is was bourgeois male preoccupation with, are these children really belonging to my bloodline? And do I really give them these things? Now, I think if we understand non-bourgeois structures of family where blood is important, but blood is not the only thing that makes us family, then we have less preoccupations with whether or not this child is actually a product of my sperm and more about my relationship to the child, right? And I do think it's also, you know, when we think about this notion in sort of the institution of marriage in the US where a father gives away their daughter to another man. I'll just say, you know, in my own experience, when my when my ex was trying to ask my father if he could marry me, my father's response was, "Does Layla want to marry you?" He said, "Because you know." No, and he was like, because he said, I could say yes, and if she doesn't want to, she won't. And I could say no, and if she wants to, she will. She's not mine to give you. Mm-hmm. You know, and she ain't yours to have. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think that there is a lot, you know, that we have to rethink about what our relations are to people, and why we also like only. Why is it that marriage it has some kind of sanctity, but any other kind of non-contractual form of relationship doesn't necessarily have the same kind of sanctity? Like, to me, the important thing is the commitment that people have to one another. And that can be monogamous or it can be non-monogamous. That can have all kinds of formations. The important thing is the consensual agreement between the involved parties.
Monogamy, not monogamy, stay out my DMs. I'm writing. I don't have time. Jared, your thoughts?
I don't have much to add on this other than the more I engage in raising my two daughters, the more I want to revisit this whole thing about arranged marriages. I find myself I'm going into the old school. I don't like
the patriarchy.
Yeah, that's me. I mean,
the patriarchy.
Yeah, let's go. Let's bring it back, because this idea of just this random selection of partners and all that, and I'm looking at the world raising these boys out here that or who might end up as my daughter's partners. I'm like, I'd like to have more involvement in that. But no, and all jokes aside, I really like what was there was an Africanism. I'm not sure precisely where it came from that I always liked, that I heard, where the parents of the daughter went to the husband and his family and said, we are happily engaging in this process and giving you our daughter. No disrespect to Layla's point, but if at any point you have any problems or issues with her, we will happily take her back to our family. You don't have to think twice or have any issues, and certainly have to engage in any hostility. And that's sort of the way I feel. Like, if one of my children makes a choice to end up with somebody, that's all well and good, and just let it be known that they are always welcome back home, and don't ever feel like that they have to be beholden to whoever. But anyway, that's just where I am. I think you all covered everything very well.
I mean, I hear you. I just want to just push one small thing that gives you a little bit more credit for you. You know, you put so much emphasis on who the man will be, but you're raising your daughters.
Yeah,
you're raising them to make good decisions. Trust their intuition. Know that they will, and also know that they can come back to you.
That's right.
So, you know,
and don't have to leave if they don't want to come to
But I mean, I think that's such a beautiful sentiment, Layla. I'm glad you say that. Yeah, I will say though, we can have the best sense of discernment and it still duds. And sometimes you don't know that motherfucker a dud until it's too late. What?
Listen, there are we learn from life, okay? And as long as that situation is not one that causes us harm, we can learn that lesson and we can keep moving. And if it causes harm, Gerald will be there. If it causes harm, my daddy will be there. I ain't worried about it.
And the women too. We got hands too.
First of all, I was going to say, I might be on my way, but I'll be third, fourth in line behind several women who will get there first. Trust that. As fast as I might be
told me real quick. She said,
period. Like, huh? Wait.
And this is intergenerational.
Say something.
we let look. I don't mind sharing. Like, at my wedding, there were I was threatened at my wedding. It was made very clear to me, bro, welcome to the family, but don't get it twisted. You mess up, you're gonna see us in a very different way. And I respected that. I dapped them up. I said I appreciate it, and just make sure you and your sons are my child's wedding saying the same thing. I was like, it's all, let's hand it down generationally.
Yeah, hand down these hands. Hand down them hands, period.
Anyway, now I really appreciate all that you all said on that. So listen, from Twitter, Dr. CBS, you got one that just simply asks, how quickly do you typically read, and what's your study process like?
Well, I think this is interesting for all of us because everybody's different. But I hear people ask Gerald Horne this a lot, like, "Are you a fast reader?" And he was like, "I don't know. It depends on what you mean by fast." Like, you know what I mean? So I feel the same way. I mean, I think I'm lazy. Like, I don't actually think I work very hard. I don't think I read as much as I should. But but and then sort of what Layla alluded to earlier, thinking about teaching, or when speaking about teaching, is like there's different types of reading, right? So there's like, I rarely read a book cover to cover unless I'm reading for leisure. Generally speaking, I'm reading a book for ideas. And so, I don't know. I probably could read a 250 page book or something in a day. I don't know if that's fast or slow. That's
it is
what it is.
It is fast. I was going to say, thank you, Layla. I was about to say that's fast.
And let me just say, just because I have the capacity to do so, don't mean I will do it. But so when I do my reading retreats, for example, like if I did a week-long reading retreat where I have a list of books and articles I want to get through, I have a particular set time and hours a day that I'll work, I'll get through them one way or another. But again, that's not reading cover to cover, and it's reading for particular information. And so now if I'm reading, so right now I'm reading this Lusk Committee document that's thousands of pages. I'm not reading the whole thing, but that reading is much slower because I'm reading for very particular things, and I'm trying to like make sense of the relationships they're making between like communism and Americanism, they're making particular arguments about Americanism. And so that's a slower type of reading. And so I might get through 12 pages in a day, And so in terms of study habits, in pandemic times, like they're very erratic. I do work when I feel like it, which is not very often. But then when I do get to work, I'll work for maybe 3-4 hours. And so I don't know is the answer. I'm just out here doing shit. But I think I read at a regular pace. I think my work habits are fine.
It ain't regular.
And that's it.
It ain't regular, sis. It ain't regular. Listen, I just want whoever asked that question, I just want to give a response and affirm you a little bit. Dr. CBS is the bionic woman when it comes to reading. Okay, listen. I don't know. I'm not saying this in a dismissive way because I don't think you're being self-deprecating intentionally or whatever. But I do think that we all tend to minimize whatever our strengths are. And Sharice, like, I see you. Like, when Sharice and I spend a lot of time together when we're presumably on vacation and other things, and she like wakes up and be reading this shit. Like, that's what she does. And so, as a person observing that from the outside, I just want to say your reading practice is not normal. It's not abnormal, but it is super normal. I do think you read more, because I would say for me, I struggle. Okay. I struggle. Like, and partially sometimes struggling is about like things that have nothing to do with reading, just like life. Mm-hmm. But then like some of it I think is also just like, I would not say I have imposter syndrome, but I do struggle with my own confidence in my writing. Mm-hmm. And so like reading to write, I think there's already a mental block there for me. Like, because when I'm reading to read, that's a different thing. But if I'm reading knowing that I have to take something from this and write, it didn't already started a domino effect for me. And it's just really hard. And so like, CBS and I have used the same, what is Kate?
Developmental editor. Oh, coach.
Yeah, a coach. And so like y'all know Sharice, I think she's talked about this before, but like in pre-panty times, Sharice's life is in a spreadsheet. And this is what she's doing from 6:15 to 6:45 and on down the day. And she done decided what she gonna read and what she gonna do with it and how she gonna do the outline, all of it. She is very generous in sharing these things with everybody. If you are friends with her on the social medias, she will share all her templates. And then you get them motherfuckers and you be like, what do I do with this? I don't know what to put in. Like, I don't know what to put in here.
I do a whole bunch of nothing. I'm not doing nothing there. Nope, I'm not doing nothing in that block. Won't be doing nothing in that block either.
And so like, and the difference I feel like with you, Jared, is at least you got kids. Like, at least you got something else you actually responsible for. I don't have nobody else I'm actually responsible for. So I just be feeling like shit. But in talking to our coach, one of the things that I realized about me is that my process is like what I said earlier. It's such an external process. So like, I'm not a journaler. because conversation is my way of processing. So like I call Sharice or I call my dad and we're on the phone for hours at a time talking about things. And though from the conversations, I can start writing. But from reading, that's difficult for me because I have to have this kind of external mode of processing things. And so like, I actually feel like I was so much better at this at grad school because I was going to class, right? Reading and knowing that I was going to have a group of people to talk about. And there are things that like when you read, you miss. But somebody says, oh, because that part, and then you're like, oh, I did read that. Oh, and it just all comes back. And I'm fully aware of what that process is like for me. And so what Katie told me, she was like, Layla, stop trying to mimic CBS's process. Have you ever just considered that? No, she did. She's like, have you ever just considered that this is your process? My process is boom or bust. And it annoys the fuck out of me, but it works for me. Like that pandemic of racial capitalism piece, it was written in 2 like 7-hour sessions. Written. But that doesn't mean that there weren't all these other things that were happening in between. And so like, everybody says, have this practice where you write for 30 minutes a day. Listen, if I keep telling myself that, I'm gonna be disappointed with myself because I have never done it.
Yeah.
So, I don't.
My answer is very short. Dr. Brown laid out much of my own personal struggles, and my 2 beautiful daughters are really just my 2 beautiful excuses because at the end of the day, I have to be real. The production level wouldn't be that much because reading to write for me is a traumatic experience. I mean, I feel traumatized. It's very difficult. And I'm a slow reader. So I just put the 285, whatever it was in a day. I don't think. Please be careful listening to CBS, everybody. That's all I'm saying. Just be careful taking her as a standard. But so yeah, I'm slow, and thank you, Dr. Brown, for laying out my own struggles as well.
But I think that for what it's worth, my process doesn't matter. This is why I'll talk about if people ask, but it's like everybody is unique. This is why I always ask, I raise questions. Are you a marathoner or a sprinter? Are you a lark or an owl? You know what I mean? Are you a pillar or a downhiller? Like, meaning, do you want to get all the heavy shit done on the front end or on the back end? Like, knowing yourself is what's important because you cannot mimic somebody else's shit. Because at some point I was trying to do what Gerald does. And I was like, nobody could do what Gerald does.
Although it does sound like you do what Du Bois did in terms of his schedule.
I know Du Bois has written I'm already late. Like, I just had to give up because I'm like, by the time Du Bois was 30, he had probably millions of pages of shit written. I got like 3 articles.
He also didn't have social media.
Okay, it's true. And he
ain't at them tweets though.
He ain't in them tweets.
No, but I don't even mean it just in terms of the distraction. I mean in terms of the multitude of ways that you produce.
Yeah.
So like because Sharice, even the way you engage on Twitter, I don't do that shit. Like every time I turn around, something from the archive, this piece, listen. I'll look up and it'll be an hour and a half later and I done read the same paragraph twice. I'm like, okay, so I'm gonna go clean my kitchen.
Ding. That's it.
I would say try audiobooks because audiobooks that might approximate the discursive way or the sort of the dialogical way that you learn. I mean, but these are the things. But the most important thing is you'll never know what you can or can't do if you don't do anything. That's the most important thing. You got to try shit and then be like, this don't work for me. Like Pomodoros, for example. Pomodoros work really well for some people to just sit there for 20 minutes and then take a break. I need to be in flow. So having that constant stopping is not necessarily useful for me. Right. But on days when I'm not focused, the Pomodoros are great because I'm like, it's just 20 minutes, my nigga. You can do anything for 20 minutes. Then you keep going. So just think about your process. And it is good to work with a coach to process externally in that way. And to I do journal, but to have some sort of introspection or some sort of like recording and then reflecting apparatus so that you can actually know what you're doing and what you've done and what actually works. So that's that.
All right, good people. A couple more here that were dropped in. One is asking about this here, a tweet from Elisa Garza, where she says, respectfully, sir, this is a whole different tune than the other day when you were talking about the perfect being the enemy of the good. This just isn't good strategy. We are being hunted. Is there a plan to actually fight for something? And she's asking about something that James Clyburn has had to say and tweeted here: we can never rest on our laurels. No matter how much we've done, there's a whole lot more that still needs to be done. You must stay engaged in the process and not give up hope that we will get to more perfect. So the question from drcbs.com is, Dr. CBS, be interested in what strategies you folks might have for ousting reps devoted to capitalism like Clyburn, and is there something to learn from what the ANC has become after they gave up on communism and internationalism?
Yeah, I mean, we don't believe in U.S. electoral politics. We're not invested in it. So basically form a third party, run candidates that are actually rooted in communities and that care about Black people and that care about Black liberation. But I know, electoral politics is what it is. And in terms of from what I understand from about the ANC, in terms of the question is, they moved away from internationalism and communism. So don't do that. Vote for people who don't do that.
Made a rainbow coalition now. So,
yeah, period. So what do y'all think? Clyburn, what can we do? Strategies.
I mean, same. Like, honestly, that's my answer. And I mean, after spending the last year in South Africa, the ANC is not a model we want to replicate. So
I agree with all that. I would just also want to add that I think we need to, from our perspective as activists and guerrilla intellectual wannabes, at least, is that we have to do some more work so that we can supplant the narratives created by the Alicia Garzas that end up supporting the Clyburns and denying our radical dreams or freedom dreams. Shout out to Robin Kelly and all that. So that's one thing I would like. That whole exchange on Twitter is disingenuous to me. That Garza would be critical of Clyburn is it's all late and seems scripted at this point. But
and also, like, we call him Clybum for a reason. Like, we don't lie burn, if you will. Like, we already know what the deal is. So, like, why are we spending quote unquote radical energy on that? Like,
yeah,
it's performative at this point. You're right.
Right on. All right. So one more good people that we wanted to get to today came from initially here, a tweet from someone going by "This is Stolen Land" quite correctly. Some white supremacist Christians broke into @Davidson College alumni email and sent this fascist piece of garbage to all the alums, excluding young alums. Apparently, I'm so tired. And we wanted to show, at least I'll share a little bit of what was sent. All right, so we got it here. And this was the email, challenging times at Davidson. It's a long piece. We're going to skip down and get to the crux of it for our purposes here at LDI, because where we're looking at here, what direction will the college take in the future? And the email says, quote, separate from the bylaw changes, many of us feel that Davidson has gone in a direction that veers away from the college's traditional academic focus and wandered into the realm of political and social activism. The fundamental goals of the college appear to be sublimated to other goals, namely the orthodoxy of political correctness. We believe that there is an urgent need to restore the college to an institution primarily focused on academic excellence, where all ideas and perspectives, even more traditional ones, are valued and explored. This includes inviting prominent speakers with a variety of viewpoints to campus, ensuring that any required books or reading be inclusive of politically different and opposing views, focusing on core curriculum, and ensuring that the faculty and leadership are receptive to and in fact promote a diversity of opinions within the Davidson community and broader world. In other words, to live out Davidson's motto, let learning be cherished where liberty has arisen. So what could possibly be wrong with that?
Well, so I did hit up my homegirl Takia, who's at Davidson, to ask her perspective. She said, I don't know enough about it. Next. So, and to a certain degree, it's like, yeah, this is just more white consternation about quote unquote cancel culture and political correctness. They want to be racist sexist, pro-Trump, horribly Zionist, whatever. They want to do that in peace, and they want to have that voice not only heard but promoted alongside what they now call wokeness. So alongside struggles for liberation and equality and equal distribution of resources and end to police murder and police brutality, that these are actually ideas should have equal weight, and that when you subsume one, right, and you promote the other, then that's moving away from academic excellence, that's moving away from tradition, and it's promoting a culture where people are being silenced, and what's insinuated is oppressed, right, marginalized. And so it's the same reverse racism, cancel culture bullshit. And white people are mad that they can't be racist anymore, and they can, and they are all the time. It happens in very subtle ways. It's like, you just can't really say the N-word anymore. That's really it, because it continues to happen in infinitely particular ways. But just a very basic kind of dotted line has been drawn. It's not even a hard line. It's just a dotted line. But even that is too much. But that's what you expect in a white supremacist, settler, colonial, capitalist society. Any challenge to the status quo is going to be seen as portending some type of radical Black communist takeover, and it has to be combated.
And that's on who? I just said, that's on who?
Yeah, that's on Bye Black Sheep, period.
No, I mean, all of that, and political correctness is just a dog whistle, at this moment. And all of this is ostensibly under the guise of them being upset because they have changed the potentially changed the religious makeup of the board of trustees. I mean, I don't even know. I don't know what to say about this, right? Because the notion that colleges and universities are just these like liberal bastions is just, only people who are not in colleges and universities can believe that, because it's just not the case. And so, even the ones that are presumably for us that's just not the case. And so this idea that, now, because what is it? What are they? Presbyterian and something else? I forget. I'm not a religious person, people. I don't know. But they want to make sure that the board of trustees has a particular kind of religious makeup to ensure that family values are maintained. Like, I don't know how this, this is, but what is at stake though, I think, in the shift of boards of trustees and decisions about presidents is that, the kind of, the high bar, the standard of academic life is tenure. And, these are people who get to weigh in on it. And so there are sort of long-term ramifications for what the college can potentially look like in years, depending on what that kind of the upper echelons of leadership look like. And so it's worth talking about, because I think a lot of people inside and outside the academy don't necessarily understand all of these sort of the levels of these decisions. But in terms of the particularities of this case, another day, another dollar. Like, what they doing? Like,
I'm glad you said that, Layli. Well, both of you actually. A lot of what you said, because the same false methodology to assess the politics of universities is applied to media, and for the same reason. So, and to do that, in other words, you don't assess the institutional politics by surveying the politics of the faculty any more than you would assess the politics of a media outlet by surveying the politics of the on-air talent. You measure it by the owners, by the administration, by the trustees, by the boards, by the broader. And in every one of those instances, without a question, they are highly conservative. They skew way to the right. So it doesn't matter how many of us racially or politically find ourselves at these institutions. That's not what they're there for. And we're not the majority. Racially or politically, so it doesn't even at an HBCU. So it just it's par for the course.
Yeah, it's just, it just shows the again the depths and the levels of white supremacy, right? And of deep anti-radicalism. Like, this country is just so deeply anti-radical, like that things that are not even radical are construed as such and then have to be combated tooth and nail. And so such that we have to struggle for everything, anything progressive. It has to be a protracted struggle, which is draining of energy, right? So of course we can barely get to the things we actually care about because we're struggling over this bullshit. Because it's consistent, because they are organized, they are well funded, and history is on their side, quite frankly. And yet it's still, they're always scared. They're always worried about, their precarity. And it's like, you got the military, you got the banks, you got the police, you got the
alphabet boys.
Institutions.
Brand new socks and drawers. This is the last time I'm gonna bring. Robert Kelly has come up a lot today, but I do think that the piece that he wrote in the Boston Globe in 2016 or so, specifically talking about not from the perspective of the right, but from us as on the left, rethinking what institutions actually do for us, what they were designed for, and rethinking our relationship to them, I think is an important piece to return to. That was around the kind of Mizzou controversy when the football team boycotted, and he was just actually asking students, in particular, student organizers, to think about what it means to think about universities as safe spaces. Because that's not what they were designed to be. And so I think that would be, that's a useful place to go back to keep thinking about those issues.
Period. Yeah, so that's that. Those are our responses. Keep your questions coming, no matter how potentially raggedy or how political, whatever. We are excited to answer them and to hear from you. So thank you, Dr. Brown, for joining us for this segment as well, and for offering your amazing insights.
Right on.
Thanks for having me.
All right, y'all, another quick and dirty what I'm on. And so what I'm thinking about is going big versus going small. Or another way to put it is when your writing expands or when it consolidates. And so generally speaking, right, when you're in the beginning and especially in the messy middle, things are getting bigger, more complicated, more expansive. You feel like you need to do more readings. You need to develop this point more. And so it's usually getting like bigger, more expansive. And so I was thinking to myself, like, am I actually almost done with this book, or am I just kidding myself, right? And so part of the way that I was like, okay, I'm actually nearing the end, is that things are starting to contract and consolidate. I'm able to take things out. I'm able to refine and therefore narrow some of the arguments that I'm making. I'm becoming more precise. There's things that I'm like, okay, I actually don't need to talk about this. I don't need to read more about this. I know exactly what I'm saying. And so part of thinking about where the areas when your writing is expanding versus when it's contracting can actually help you gauge where you are in a particular project. And it's also can help you with your planning, right? So if you're planning to write a journal article or even a blog post, for example, you know that you might have to allot more time for the messy middle, because that's when things are going to be getting bigger and unwieldy. And, but toward the end, when things are narrowing out, that might be when you can schedule or sit down for less time, right? And so thinking about, and I just also think it's important, I think I spoke about this before, to think about the different phases of writing and the different aspects of it, whether you're thinking about, the pace or the rhythm, which I talked about before, whether you're setting something aside and coming back to it. There's all of these different phases to writing and all these different ways to sort of to categorize or think about it that will help you, again, just know yourself better as a writer and to approach your project in a way that is that gives you more insight. And so it doesn't feel so overwhelming and it doesn't feel so nebulous. And so when you go on to work on another project, if you've taken notes, if you've tracked and then reflected, you know how to approach the next project. So you're not always like reinventing the wheel. And so, I am glad that I'm in this period of consolidation because it makes the finish line seem closer, because whereas in a previous stage, I felt like there was more and more and more I needed to add. Now it's like, things are actually coming together in a sort of tight and compacted way. And so I feel it feels just much more possible that there actually is an end in sight to this book. So that's all I wanted to say. But Jared, do you have any closing thoughts?
I do. And of course, it starts with, again, congratulations on another great show. Covered a lot, and I always enjoy Layla's presence. So that was
Yes.
a bunch of fun segments with her. And again, I mean, I just, not that I feel like it should need the emphasis, but I really do hope people are, again, paying attention to your writing tips and how you've shared your process with us. Because for those of us who have written, again, those of us who will write again, who have not yet written, all of us can benefit from what you're laying out there. So politically and in terms of process, we appreciate you. Another great show. So congratulations.
Well, I appreciate you and Layla for making this a more dialogical show. It's always great to be in conversation and to just think through things with smart, dope, radical Black people. So that's our show for this Friday evening. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with me. So thank you for that. I am Dr. CBS here with Dr. App, and we are signing off.